everyone, my name is REDRUP, this is the It's Not a Phase podcast, and on this episode I'm joined by Sam Bloor, who's a music producer based in Stoke-on-Trent in the UK. We talk all about how he got into music production, setting up his own studio called Lower Lane Studios, working with the likes of Black Coast and Graphic Nature, tips for those looking to work with a producer or even become one themselves, and loads more. Now, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast and you want to show your support, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. It takes just a few seconds and it really does help. Number two, share this on your social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Or number three, if you want to go the extra mile, you can pay a little bit each month to join the Patreon, and in return you'll get access to episodes early along with some other perks, or you can pick up some merch from the store. All the links to that and the podcast socials where you can follow us can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's episode of It's Not a Phase. What's up everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of It's Not a Phase, where I'm joined by music producer Sam Bloor, who's based in Stoke and has his own little studio called Lower Lane Studios. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. As we were saying before, I've known you for a little over 10 years now from one of your old bands.
Yeah, you were one of the only supporters of that band, so thank you very much for that.
That band was Talk Is Cheap, and I think, probably plenty of other bands you've been in, but you were in another band called Paper Tigers for a little bit as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. So Talk Is Cheap was like one of my very first bands, like kind of my high school band, you know, going into college. And we did a bunch of cool stuff, but it was really like when I moved into Paper Tigers and then the Overcast after that. So I haven't been in a band for a little while now, and I never really achieved any like huge, amazing things with music as a performer. But yeah, that was when we first met, kind of around that scene at the time. It was a great scene. Like we were kind of a pop punk band, and then we sort of started doing a bit more like post-hardcore sort of stuff and started screaming a bit more and things like that. So it was a fun time, man. It was all going on.
I know it's like a whole different life for you. Yeah,
it definitely feels like a lifetime ago since I played a show. Like, I'm not going to lie, it'd be nice to play a show again, but it's, I don't know, like when you're working on music all day as a job, it's like, it got to a point where I just wasn't really enjoying that side of it as much as a performer.
So you don't really you wouldn't want to go back in a band anytime soon, do you not think? It's not like you're itching to get back on a stage.
No, I could get back into it tomorrow if I wanted to, but I really, really enjoy kind of bouncing around between different projects. And like, I get to work with so many different types of people. I could literally be working on like death metal one day and then like an acoustic artist. And that really keeps me on my toes. And I find it very, very hard to just create one style. Like I like so many different things. I just don't know where I would begin if I was to start writing my own music, because I just don't think I could pick one type of band to be. Yeah. So I'd have to start like 4 or 5 different bands probably.
Yeah. You could be like, Jared Alonge, who has all these parody bands.
Yeah.
You have like a pop punk band, a metalcore band, and
yeah. Yeah, it could do, but I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing at the moment. I think it kind of suits me. Being like behind the scenes, I think it's kind of fits my personality a bit better, I think.
Yeah, like I say, you can just dabble in different projects then, can't you? And just put
keeps it really fresh, you know. You don't know what's going to be coming in. You get to see, people like start out with not very much and then go on and achieve like huge, amazing things. So that's like really satisfying. It's like being the proud dad behind the bands. Like I'm like living through a lot of the bands that I work with because I never really, had like great success with like being a musician. So it's kind of like, it's nice to see, what people can go on and do, like bands that I work with. And like really, I feel really proud when they do stuff like, Graphic Nature are playing Download this year and Black Coast are at Bloodstock. And like, I feel really, really proud of them for like getting there. It's awesome.
Yeah. So I mentioned at the start there that you've got your own studio, Lower Lane Studios, because obviously there's a lot of, producers out there and it's just kind of like a bedroom kind of thing. How long have you been, running and upkeeping that studio for now?
Oh God, I've been making like recordings and productions for I would have been doing it back when I met you in the Talk Is Cheap days. So I've been doing it since I was about 18, 19. And right. that was like a bedroom kind of thing. And it just developed from there really. I just kept making more and more and more records, and I was getting better and better. And it got to the point where people would start to ask me if I could produce them, and I started to make a little bit of money on the side. And then eventually probably, like after sort of 4 or 5 years of it being kind of like a hobby, I used to drive. I used to like take all my equipment around in a car, and we'd hire out like a village hall or a church or something like that. And just set up for the day and record and go. So like I had like a portable rig, and then I was just doing it so much that eventually I saved up enough money to get a little property and just renovated it very, very, very slowly. So I've been in this location now for about 8.5 years.
Right.
So it started as literally like a derelict old building. There was like no floors, there was no plumbing. I had to have the whole place like rewired, and it just kind of started there. Basically, just chipped away at it bit by bit. Took me about 6 months in the beginning to get it to a place where I could actually open, and then the rest is history. Really, it's like just gradually, bit by bit, just improved the place. And now it's like a really, really nice facility. Like I kind of forget sometimes, like I walk in and I kind of take it for granted, but the place is like, it's amazing now that we've got like a control room downstairs, a control room upstairs. It's like the live room is amazing. There's like a vocal booth, and there's so much equipment. There's so many different instruments to play with. And we have like aircon now, and it's just like an actual proper studio, but it started out as like a really, really DIY space, but it's all thanks to the people who've like supported the place. Really, it's like it's been built by the community. I don't have rich parents. I've never had like a bank loan or anything like that. It's just been every time I've done a recording project, just putting a huge percentage of that back in, just month after month after month, and 8 years on, it's like a proper studio, which I'm really proud of. But yeah, you do forget sometimes when you walk in.
Yeah, well, I mean, people listening can see like a kind of walkthrough video that you've got on your website, and like I say, it's got 2 floors. You've got so much like equipment that people can use, pretty much any kind of pedal you would need for any kind of project that people are working on. It's just amazing, especially if you say like when you've walked in, it's basically like a derelict house, basically. Or
yeah, honestly, it was crazy. It was one of those things where I think I'm so glad that I did it when I was really young, because I was so incredibly naive to how hard it would be. Yeah. I just kind of did it, and I think, I'm 30 now, and I really think I'd have a hard time like quitting my job and starting this from the ground up now. I just don't think I'd have the balls to like jump in, but I think I must have been 21, 22, and I was like, sure, like, I'll sign a lease. Like, let's do it. Like, and that's just, I just think that's amazing. Like, I think, I'm really glad I did it when I was young and kind of stupid. Yeah. But it kind of, I guess it worked in the end. It's my full-time job now and has been for 5 or 6 years. So yeah, really, really happy. Like, get to work on so much cool stuff. So
what do you think you would have done differently if you tried to start it now?
I guess one of the only things I would maybe do is, I would maybe try and like study underneath someone else who was like maybe more successful, because I literally just started out on my own. I had like no mentorship, no help, just kind of figured it out as I went, really. Just lots of YouTube, lots of reading. It would have been nice, I think, maybe to have like a helping hand through that, learn from someone a little bit wiser, because I'm doing that now. So obviously I'm 10 years into my career, and like I'm able to like pass on really good information to the young guy who now works for me. And like to see how fast his career is progressing, it's like night and day between how fast mine was in the beginning. So I think maybe if I would have had a little help in the beginning, maybe my career would have kind of taken shape a bit faster. But I also feel like, I don't know, there's I don't mind the graft, it's been quite a challenge, and I think that's quite nice sometimes to just kind of figure it out on your own and just stand on your own 2 feet with it. But yeah, I don't know, it's hard to say, isn't it, what you would change really? Yeah. It's just you kind of end up somewhere and you think there's so many factors to like how you kind of end up in a position, and there's so much more I want to achieve, by the way. It's just like, it's not as if I've like arrived at the the end point here. Like, I feel like I'm literally just at the beginning. Like, I'm just kind of cracking into one thing at the moment, and I feel like, I'm maybe just getting into that next tier of bands, and then it's like, but I know there's so much more I can do. So it's like, who knows? That might take another 5 years or 10 years, but it's like, I think that's part of the chase, isn't it? Like, I think that's what's kind of so addictive about it in a way.
Yeah, and it's good that you've still got you say you're 10 years into this career as a producer. It's good that 10 years on, you've still kind of got that hunger to get more and more and work with bigger bands and maybe have a bigger studio or whatever it may be that you want to do next.
Yeah, man, you can't stop really. You've just got to keep plugging away week in, week out. But I think that's kind of like, I mean, obviously you spent a lot of time in Stoke, but I just think that's like the working class mentality, really. I just think I wouldn't really know what to do with myself if I wasn't incredibly stressed and busy, to be honest.
Like the default setting.
Yeah. I just think that's just what I'm like wired to do. Just be very stressed and busy. But yeah, man, it's all good.
For people listening, obviously, as a recording studio and a producer, you record and produce the music. And, there'll be people listening who don't quite know what the difference is between mixing and mastering. So I guess in a very brief way, can you kind of explain what the two differences are and why they're important as part of the music production process?
Yeah, of course. So mixing and mastering are pretty different, but also not that different in a sense, because you're just essentially doing a process to the music. But the difference is really is mixing, you've got access to every tiny little individual detail. So mixing is very microscopic. You could be working on tiny little breaths in the vocal, or you could be taking out like tiny little details of the guitar, like tiny little notch EQs from like specific instruments. You could be doing some kind of weird filter on like a background synth or something like that. And then mastering is like the final check in the chain. The only thing that the mastering engineer has access to is like the finalized mix. So that's everything in the mix. So if you could have recorded 100 tracks, you've compiled that down into one stereo file, and then that's the only thing that the mastering engineer has access to. So it's the overall balance, overall loudness, and it's that final check before it hits the listener. So a lot of the time I end up doing the pre-production, the recording, the mixing, the mastering, all in one. I do all of those jobs with a band, and that's great. Like, it's all being dealt with by one person. But I think where mastering really excels is by having like an outside opinion. I think that's where the real magic comes from. So like any projects that I do that have the budget for it, I get a guy called Grant Berry in Manchester to do all my mastering. And Grant has like an amazing skill of just taking what I have and then just adding 5 or 10% to that. Just makes it better, makes it louder, makes it play across all systems. And that's where mastering comes in. But it's not that like he's doing anything that I don't understand or I'm incapable of doing. It's just that I haven't thought to do it because I've kind of reached my maximum with that project, or I've kind of like reached the end of the line. Right. And then it's about just offloading it to that person who's then able to see clearly what needs to happen because they've got perspective at that point. So I think any kind of artistic thing like this is just perspective is kind of everything. And I think after a certain point, if you've been working on something for like hundreds of hours, it's like very hard sometimes to see how you could make it better or change it. So that's kind of the difference really. So mixing, yep, very, very microscopic. It's dealing with hundreds of tiny decisions. Mastering's very broad, still very important, but dealing with the end of the line product basically.
And you mentioned a minute ago there that you do so many parts of the process, like pre-production, recording. Is there a part of the process that you like the most, that's your favorite, or do you kind of just like the whole idea of creating something from almost nothing when it comes into the studio?
I really love working with a project from almost nothing right through to the end. So like taking, say a band comes in, a good example of this is a band like Black Coast. Like we've kind of got a relationship now where, I'm very, very involved in like the direction of where that band goes. So more often than not, they come to the studio with literally 2 or 3 riffs for a song, just kind of ideas, like maybe a riff that might work for an intro or verse, and then maybe some chords for the chorus. And then we work as a partnership then to like build that song from scratch and then see that all the way through to the recording and mixing process. And I really, really enjoy that because you get to have such a really important input, and it just feels like you're really part of like creating something. And I really, really do enjoy that. But I guess I also really I do enjoy mixing as well. So like sometimes when I'm recording, I can't wait to get to the mixing side of things. So I'll be kind of like, when the band's like having a cup of tea or whatever, I'll be like doing little mixing things and trying to get it to the end line, because I just can't wait to hear the finished product kind of thing. But so yeah, I really enjoy the writing side. That really like scratches an itch for me, because I don't obviously write my own music anymore. So that's quite nice, because I get to do lots of different styles. So I get to like exercise different muscles across different genres. But I really enjoy everything. Like, I mean, tracking can be, you know, if you're tracking like an EP or an album and you're like doing 9-10 hours a day for like, 6, 7, 8, 9 days, that can be pretty fatiguing. And after a few days, you're like, oh, I really could do with, getting into the mixing side of things again. But it's like, you've got to do everything, you know?
Yeah, it's part of the process. You've got to, you don't want to rush it, because then that affects the whole thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. These things take time,
Yeah.
Making a song or an EP or an album, it does take like a exceptional amount of time, really, hundreds and hundreds of hours that go into these things,
Yeah. And to that end, do you have kind of like a least favorite part of the process, or just like what you feel is the hardest part of it all?
No, I do really love it, honestly. I love kind of like all the things that come with it. Like, some things are stressful, of course. I think probably the business side of things is like less exciting. I obviously really, really enjoy anything that's like to do with making music, but obviously that actually ends up being like a smaller fraction of my job than I'd like, really, because there are times when, you just have to deal with the business side of things, and like, like the waste disposal company like hasn't picked up the bins for 3 weeks, and you've got to get on the phone and deal with that. And
that's why you got into production, wasn't it?
Yeah. Or you have a flood, or, when it was really cold recently and like the entire toilet froze, like the entire like basin and everything was frozen. So it's like, those things keep you on your toes, and, it's, I wish you didn't have to deal with those kind of things, but it's just all part of it, really.
Yeah.
Owning a property as well as like making music. It's like, you can't just have all of the fun stuff. You've got to do some of the business things,
Yeah, all the admin and tax returns and all that stuff as well. Exciting things.
Yeah. Yeah, all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Are there any particular producers out there that inspire you the most in terms of what you do nowadays, or have inspired you over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. My hero really for a producer is Eric Valentine, who worked with like Taking Back Sunday, Good Charlotte, and Third Eye Blind, and all those kind of things. And I think when I started to hear Eric's productions, I think it was around the time when I started to really listen to records for the sound. And I started to really notice that the things that I loved the sound of the most quite often were coming from him.
Right.
And there was something that was kind of happening with those records that I couldn't explain for a long time, and I didn't understand for a long, long time. But it was, maybe when I was around 18 or 19, started kind of getting into production. It was just his name kind of kept cropping up on the back of like, liner notes and things. And I was like, okay. And I started to, that's kind of around the time really I was becoming more and more interested in production anyway, and started to really notice things like the sound of snares and the sound of like certain guitar tones, and like what was kind of making me tick. And it wasn't just so much about like the songs anymore. I was starting to hear everything else and started to really get excited into that world. So Eric's my hero really when it comes to stuff like that.
So that, there's going to be people listening that may be curious and have an interest in getting into music production themselves. How and when did you kind of realize that that's kind of the career path you wanted to pursue yourself?
Oh, really, really early on, actually, man. Like, we went to a studio when I was probably 15 or 16, and something just felt really right about it. I realized that, like, I really loved the studio. Like, when my band went to the studio, that was like the best. That was like the best thing ever about being in a band for me. Like, I enjoyed that over everything else, like all the shows, and we had some amazing shows and, did loads of cool things. But when we went to the studio, that was like the one thing that I just absolutely loved. And I don't know, something really clicked with me. So really early on, like 15, 16, I started to think this feels kind of like what I want to do. But obviously at that time, you just have no clue how to get there. So ended up, going to college and trying to end up on I wanted to do a music production course, but I ended up on a music performance course instead, because I think the numbers were so low on the production course. So they kind of pushed us all together and said that we would be doing some recording, but we basically never ever did.
Right.
I think we did like about 3 weeks in 2 years. So I ended up spending 2 years at college, learning like 64-bar blues scales, when really like I wanted to be learning how to use Pro Tools or Logic or something like that. And we never got to go in the studio. So that was really like disheartening. So after college, I decided just not to go to university. I decided to get I'm trying to think of the timeline now. Yeah, so my second year in college, that's when we made the Talk is Cheap EP with Matt O'Grady. And we went down to Surrey and we recorded this EP with Matt, and his like setup was really, really, really simple. It was a tiny studio with, we ended up, I think we tracked the drums in like a school, which he never told us any of this, by the way, before we went down there. It's not what I thought we were signing up for, but because we'd been to studios in Stoke before and they always seemed really like unattainable. They were like huge warehouse facilities with like tens of thousands of pounds worth of equipment. And the engineer there kind of had told me how much some of these things had cost. And I just thought, there's no way. Like, I kind of thought, well, I might never get to do this until I'm in my 30s. Like, I'm going to have to go and get a job, save up 50, 60,000 pounds and then do it. And then when we went and made a record of Matt, and I kind of realized that he was making a record on like a shoestring budget. But obviously Matt at the time, he was working with like You Me at Six and Def Havana and all these like massive bands. And I was thinking, well, he's making records with these amazing bands that we love on a shoestring budget. He's in his like mum's basement. And I was like, oh, hang on. So I kind of, instead of going to university after college, I got a MacBook, I got one microphone, I got a book on how to use Pro Tools, and I just started kind of making recordings, and I just kind of figured it out from there, I guess. And I did end up going to university, but I wouldn't say that that's got much to do with me having a career in audio, to be honest. I think having a degree is great. Like it's a good backup. Like if like the studio closes tomorrow, I can go and get like a lecturing job, or I can go and do something else because I've got a degree in music tech. But I don't know. I think really I ended up doing this because I figured it out, basically. So yeah, I kind of always wanted to do it, like really. Yeah. And I really started to dig in around 19 or 20. And by that, I wasn't charging very much. I was charging like maybe £30 a song, but like I managed.
Cheap.
Yeah. So I managed to get, I started with one microphone, then I had two, and then I managed to get 8 microphones. And then I was like, oh, cool, I can do drums now. So then I started, instead of working with acoustic artists, I managed to start doing drums. And then, after a little bit, it just kind of, it just grows and grows and grows. It's funny to look back on, actually. It's quite crazy.
Do you remember what the first music was that you produced and released yourself?
I worked with an acoustic artist called Aaron Mobley, and we did the whole EP with one microphone. So we did like the acoustic guitar, then the vocal, and then we recorded all the drums like one drum at a time. We only had one mic, so he would play the kick drum and I'd record that, and then he'd play the snare or he'd play the cymbal, and we just layered it up like that, and kind of. So yeah, that was my first like proper taste of like working with a paying artist. And we just made that in my dad's shed. And then I just kind of went from there. And then there was one year where my nan and granddad went to Australia for 6 months, and I stupidly started recording bands in their house.
Oh wow!
which was a bad idea, by the way. It didn't end up working out that well, but I thought, I could set up a control room in the kitchen, and then I could run like cables into the living room and put drums in there. And so I ended up making 2 or 3 kind of recordings in there. And I think I was just that desperate to do it. Genuinely, I know it's a stupid thing to do, but it's just one of those things I was really compelled to do. It just took a long time to figure out kind of how to get there, really. So it's all just good practice,
Yeah, I guess because as well, you mentioned that you were self-taught and you didn't really shadow anyone that was already doing it. Then you're kind of learning the rope yourself. So, but they do say mistake is life's greatest teacher.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Yeah.
I definitely made enough of those.
So for someone looking to enter it themselves as a complete beginner, you having learned all these lessons yourself and can pass them on, what tips would you give in terms of where to begin, what to read and learn, what kind of software and equipment, just to kind of get a taste of it before they kind of, dive deep into, paying, as you said before, like 50, 60, £7,000 and getting their own studio and stuff like that?
Honestly, like there could not be a better time to get into these kinds of things. Like you need next to nothing to make amazing music. There's so many examples of like people who are incredibly successful with literally, I think as long as you've got a laptop and like a DI box and one microphone, you can basically do anything. It's actually insane. The amount of things that you can do now with like software is scary. Like even recording like guitar amps and things like that, the technology has improved so much that it's actually getting to a point where it's hard to beat some of these softwares with the real equipment.
Right.
But it's like, I kind of came from a different era, like just on the cusp of like the bedroom producer era. So at the time, like I needed to have a drum room. I needed to have a place where I could record guitars loud, but you don't need any of those things anymore. So really, like people can do it with a laptop and you can absolutely learn all of these things on, YouTube. And then outside of that, you've got so much information in podcasts. You've got Mix with the Masters, you've got Nail the Mix, URM Academy. All of those places are just amazing source of information. And like I say, I've been to university myself and like I'm doing some talks at a couple of universities this year. I don't want to knock university too much because I think there's loads of great reasons to go and there's definitely other careers that you can get into. But if you are literally looking to record a band for a living, which is what I do, it's like a degree isn't really going to teach you how to do that. The kind of lectures and lessons and things that you get at university are not really based around recording a 5-piece rock band. But I learned some amazing things at university, like, to do with acoustics and stuff like that. So I'm not knocking that side of it. But if you just want to record your own band, like you can learn that stuff so easily on YouTube. The amount of free information is insane, far beyond what there was 12 years ago. So yeah, just all I would say to people is just do it, basically. I think too many people kind of wait. And I always say to, so if people get in touch and they ask me for like work experience and things like that, I know it's kind of harsh, but the first thing I always ask is send me something you've recorded. And if they haven't recorded something themselves, if they haven't had the get up and go to just get a microphone and just stick it in front of something, you're not ready to come to the studio for work experience because it's so easy now. So it's kind of like a little process that I go through to just kind of vet how serious people are. But if you haven't done that, then I can't really, you're not going to gain much from coming to the studio at that point. Like the entry level is much higher now and people are making some amazing things. It's the demos that some of these bands send me. It's actually scary. It's like, you think, oh my God, I'm going to have a hard time beating this. It's crazy.
Well, speaking of taking things seriously, at what point did you kind of start taking this seriously as, a potential full-time career and, kind of building your references and list of clients of bands and artists that you've worked with?
I took it seriously right from the beginning. Like, this is not something that happened by accident. That's something I always say as, it was hard. It was really hard. And there was definitely times where it didn't make any sense financially to keep going. And it felt like the opportunities were not there, but I just kept plugging away. But the biggest leap I ever made is when, so I started the studio the year I came out of university. And at the same time as that, I got a part-time job lecturing. So I actually went back to the university that I studied at and began lecturing, because I was that much of a nerd, basically. And I knew like Pro Tools inside out. So I ended up teaching Pro Tools.
Right. Okay.
At the place I just studied. So I did that for 2 years at Newcastle College and some stuff at Staff's Uni. And then basically you can only teach unqualified for 2 years. And then I kind of hit this fork in the road where I was offered a job, but I would have to go and do teacher training for a year, or I could just leave. So I was kind of like, I don't really want to be a teacher, or at least not now. So I don't really want to take out another student loan, and I don't want to go back into education for a year to keep this job. So I guess I'll just try my hand at going full time. So basically I did 2 years lecturing, and then I just made the leap, and I didn't have enough work on at the time for that to make sense, but I just made the jump, and I think just the fight or flight kind of kicked in. And it actually ended up being an amazing thing, because I think I just started to make things happen, and I started to be a little bit more forceful with my approach, and just got really on top of the social media side of things and just give it that extra push that it needed. And I think that was the big push that I needed. Just not having any security, just knowing that the bills wouldn't be paid if I didn't get the projects in. So I think that was when things got a bit more serious. You know, me and my wife now, I think we were like just renting a house at the time as well. I think it was the first house that we got together. And then like, as soon as we kind of got that, I quit my job. So I had to make it happen, you know, that's the only way.
Yeah, just try and fake it till you make it.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Still doing that now, basically.
Sometimes you just have to wing it and go for it, because otherwise there's not always ever going to be the right time to do certain things. You just got to do it and hope for the best.
Absolutely not, no. And I think it just goes back to being just that little bit more naive, basically, not having as much to lose. You know, it's like, if it would have failed, like, really, what's the worst that would have happened, you know? I've got a, great family. I could have moved back in with my mom, could have rebuilt from there. It's like, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. It would have been devastating for me personally, but it's like, I think it just helps being young and not having as many commitments, because it'd be a lot harder to do now, definitely. Yeah. So if anyone wants to get into this kind of thing, I would just say, like, do it when you don't have huge commitments, basically.
Yeah.
Because when you're young, you can live off very little and get by just fine. So yeah, that's my advice.
Do it while you're young, basically. Wing it as best as you can.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it'll figure itself out, I guess.
Yeah. And what would you say so far has kind of been the moment of your career as a producer that you're most proud of, or that sticks out to you?
Oh, that's really tough, isn't it? I don't know, because I never feel, I don't know. I'll never be, I don't know if I'll ever be satisfied. Like, I'll always want to, like, achieve more.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's just so many, like, small things stick out, and they're just little proud moments. I mean, when I was all last year we were working on the Graphic Nature album, and then I went to 2000 Trees in the summer and I saw them playing there, and it just felt, I literally had goosebumps watching them, because I felt like they and I had finally kind of arrived at, like, the table, you know, like playing at a proper festival with proper bands, and they absolutely packed the tent out, and it was just such a proud moment. And then, you know, bands like Black Coast, who I've worked with for ages, just watching them go from strength to strength to strength. And then literally, I think last week they had like 3 Radio 1 plays in the same day, and I was just like, I think we were all shocked, actually, but, like, at the same time, I'm not, because it's really well deserved. Like, it's everything that it should be getting, but it's just taken us a long time to get there.
Yeah.
So little things like that stick out, but I think you get a moment like that, and then you just move to the next one, and you just, you know, it's like Graphic Nature will be at Download this year, and I'll be so proud watching them there, but then I'll be like, okay, like, then somehow we've got to follow up how well this record did, you know. So I'm always thinking, about the next thing, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm proud of all my bands, like, you know, on whatever scale they're working on. Like, whenever I see a band that I'm working with play live, and, you know, and I see, like, how much they're streaming and how well they're doing on YouTube and stuff, like, I feel proud of everyone that I work with.
Well, speaking of, you know, bands that you work with, you know, there'll be some people listening now who are in bands themselves or make music, and they've not been to a producer yet, but that's kind of what they're thinking about as the next step. Before they do that, what would you recommend that a band does before they step into a studio or a producer? Would you recommend, obviously, that they research which producer they go with, and kind of what position they need to be in to be ready to work with a producer?
Okay, yeah. I think the first thing is, it's all about preparation, really, before you get to the studio. It's about, like, really understanding what's involved. You know, studios now are not like, you know, the whole band doesn't stand around in the live room and do full takes as a live band. That's just not how these things work. You know, it's like we set up the drums and we record the drums. You know, we do the intro, then the verse, then the chorus, and we work through it bit by bit. And then when we get to the guitars, sometimes you have to record each chord individually because the guitar is not perfectly in tune for each one. And, you know, making a record is not the same thing as like playing live. So I think the first thing is like getting prepared and just really understanding about like what is involved and having those conversations as a band of like how to like break down your songs and really understand all the intricate details. So I think one of the best ways that people can do that is to learn how to record themselves. It doesn't mean that you don't then need a producer. It just means that you will understand the process of just how detailed recording can get, you know, because I'm going to be picking apart every little intricate detail and making sure that every drum fill and every chord change and every vocal and every harmony all lines up together and works in harmony. So it's about that. And I think also bands just to learn to kind of like leave the ego at the door and just be a part of the process, just be very open-minded, be ready for things to change, be ready for curveballs. You know, if for some reason the singer can play that one guitar part better, then they should play that. You know, it's like whoever can do it the best on the record should do it. And it's like, it's just about understanding that creating that product it's not about massaging everyone's egos. Like the studio should be really fun, of course, and we're here for a good time. But at the end of the day, the product is a collection of everyone's hard work. And it's not about like, I don't care if you can play it. Like maybe you can play your song top to bottom, 4.5 minutes, like note for note perfect. But like, it's not the modern approach. It's not kind of how it gets done. So I think, if people can start learning how to demo the songs, I think you start to see that for yourself. And I think then you come into the studio and you're not shocked when, someone starts making suggestions or saying, hey, we should try this or we tried that, or let's move this here. Just keep an open mind and just be open to that experience, really.
Yeah.
And then in terms of researching, I think it's very important to find the right person. But I mean, you should get a sense of that from like different people's like social media presence and the kind of bands that they work with. You should kind of get a feel for like who you might gel with. But if you're unsure, then just get on the phone and have a chat and see if you kind of like your ethos kind of lines up and whether you feel like you would make a good record together. There's loads and loads and loads of talented people out there, amazing studios. So it shouldn't be hard to find somebody. You just basically pick the producer that recorded something that you like the sound of.
Yeah, it's as simple as that, really.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
When you were talking about, rubbing people's egos and stuff like that, I think it was when they were doing the Black Album Metallica. Like, I remember, like, they were like, well, you don't play guitar, so you're not going to tell me how to play my part on the album. And it's crazy to think that, still, it's 2023, so 30 years later, some bands are still like that sometimes.
Yeah, it can happen, occasionally. But like I say, it can come as a surprise initially when I start to have that conversation. But then the more you come to the studio, the more you realize that the thing that you leave with is probably not what you came in with. And 99% of the time, that's for the best. That's my job at the end of the day, is to like make sure that you leave with great product. So if there's something that's not working, then it wouldn't actually be right of me to not say, would it? I need to tell people if there's a mistake or if there's something that's not working. And you might be very, very proud of that lead part that you wrote, but if it totally ruins the vocal and it totally clashes with the vocal, then I would be doing them an injustice by not saying anything. Because then you're only going to leave and your song's not going to do very well. And then people are going to start saying like, why does that sound so bad? And then they'll start thinking that maybe I didn't care enough to say. So you kind of have to have those conversations, really.
Yeah, like you say, if you don't really do the due care and pay the attention that you should as a producer, then their song potentially sounds bad, which means it doesn't do very well. And then they see your name listed as producer, which means you get a bad rep as a producer. So you're helping everyone in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's my job at the end of the day. Yeah, I think that's the difference between being a producer or making a production versus being a recording engineer or just being hired to just press record. And that's probably the biggest difference between what I do and like what some kind of like more commercial style studios do. It's like nothing really is set in stone until we've kind of like looked at every piece, if that makes sense. So I think that, but I just kind of do that by default, There's nothing, I think this would actually be a very, very, very boring job if I didn't have any say in anything or like get to stretch that muscle. I think if my job was just literally just pressing record over and over again with no, thought or emotion attached to like what I was doing or like trying to like nurture or help anyone. I really think it'd be a very different job actually. I think it would actually be very monotonous because the actual process of like actually recording is pretty laborious. You know, you're going over and over and over again to get it in tune in time, but it's the creative side and it's the engaging with people and like discussing creative ideas and trying to make what you came in with that 10 or 20% better. I think that is what is inspiring about being in the studio. It's not the actual just physically recording something. That's something that happens mechanically.
Yeah, and this is going to sound a bit like a job interview question, so apologies in advance. But people listening who are looking for producers, why should a band consider reaching out to work with you as a producer as opposed to anyone else who's out there?
Oh, is there any way of me answering that without looking like a maniac?
I don't think there is. No.
That's fine. I'm okay with it.
You can rub your ego a bit now. So
no, that's absolutely fine. Why should people work with me? I think any band that is open to getting into the weeds and ready to really push themselves and experiment and try and be the very, very best. I think those are the bands that should get in touch with me, basically. If you're kind of happy with where you're at and you want someone to just capture what you've got and then that's it, then I can do that, but that's not really where I excel. So if you want someone who's going to poke around in your songs a little bit and try and drag out the best elements of the band and shine a spotlight on what I think is the best that band can be, then those are the kind of people that probably should reach out, I guess. So if you're looking to maybe change things up and you want a fresh perspective, I think that's something that I'm quite good at. But apart from that, it's a nice studio. Stoke-on-Trent's a nice, cheap place to visit, and it's a nice working atmosphere here. It's really relaxed, and we just have a good time. So it's if people are listening, like by all means, get in touch. Like, I love to hear from new bands. So. And
if people want to go visit the Pottery Centre, then kill two birds with one stone as well.
That's it. Yeah, there's it's an amazing place for tourists, Stoke-on-Trent. But it's a funny place to put a studio, really. But if you think about it, it's not a bad place because it's like smack bang in the middle of the country and it's like straight off the M6. So, and it's super cheap as well. So, my rates are not too bad. And it's quite cheap to come and stay here. So that's enough plug-in, I think, isn't it?
I think you've sold yourself there. Yeah.
Plugged myself enough.
Yeah.
Cool.
What would you say, in your opinion, makes a good producer?
There's lots of different angles to that, isn't there? Because you can have really, really talented, like amazing musicians, and you can have really, it's being a producer is quite a funny one, actually. I often think about this. It's like, it's a very creative job and a very technical job at the same time, which is two completely different sides of the brain. So you kind of need to have like an understanding of like the science of capturing music with microphones and understanding how sound works and how electronics work and speakers and things like that, and how like the physics of a drum work and all that kind of nerdy stuff that like I quite get off on. Like, I really enjoy noodling around with things like that and taking a drum and tuning it to every single note that drum is capable of and trying all the different intervals between the top head and bottom head. Like, I enjoy that nerdy stuff. But then also I think you've got to be a creative person and be open for experimentation. But then you've also got to be a people person. So quite often the people who are amazingly technically proficient musicians, like I'm not a good musician. I don't know music theory. I can only play the guitar a bit. I can play a tiny bit of piano. I can barely sing. But like, somehow I've got a career as a producer because like, it's not always about that. It's like what you tend to find is like, sometimes you have engineers who are like amazing at the technical side of things, but are then not very good people pleasers, or like good at handling like boisterous bands who are like very loud and like maybe they don't do well in that side of things. And then you've got the other people who are like incredibly creative and like really wacky and open for experimentation, but then they've got no handle on like, say, time management, or like they're not very budget conscious. So like every session constantly runs over and nothing ever gets finished. So I think to be a good producer, you've kind of got to sit right in the middle of that Venn diagram of being like you're good to be around, you're friendly, but you can be assertive, but you can be technical, but then you can also be creative. And it's just about having that sweet spot right in the middle, if that makes sense. I was kind of like, that was really off the top of my head, but I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It's just like that finite little thing where all those qualities come together.
Yeah.
And I've met people on all ends of that spectrum, and like there's people who are so much more creative than me, so much better musicians than me, like amazing on guitar, or so much more like technically minded than me. But it's just about like, I think the people who are the best at this and stick it out for the longest kind of just like have just enough of all those things. It's a bit of a mad job, really. It's a bit of a weird one.
And, you know, you mentioned before we kind of started talking that you've worked with and dabbled with bands of kind of different genres and sounds and stuff like that. For people listening who might consider working with you, what kind of genres do you work with? Or are there any genres that you've not worked with yet that you would be interested in working with?
I work with so much, like such a wide range of things, actually. It's, I think more so than a lot. And I think that's because I just never really niched down into anything. And I kind of like, when I start to see a lot of the same kind of bands, I start to like get a bit panicky because I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this forever.
You don't want to be like the pop punk producer or the metal producer. Or... Yeah,
I've never really like, I think at one time I started doing a lot of hardcore and I was getting a bit panicky. I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this now, but I don't really want to be the hardcore guy.
Yeah.
It's not like, that's not what's like in my roots, you know, and, you know, I love like Kate Bush and Bon Iver and Phoebe Bridgers. And like, I think if I was like recording hardcore week in, week out, I just think I'd go insane. Like I need, so like, but I think my absolute kind of ideal really is like my sensibilities are more in like the sort of alt rock to emo kind of thing. Like I grew up through like the whole emo scene phase, and like all my favorite bands are like Taking Back Sunday and My Chemical Romance and The Used and stuff like that. Like that's me. Like that's really like my go-to. Yeah. But like I've got a really wide range of stuff that I love, and really, as long as I'm not doing too much of the same thing, I'm quite happy. So like whatever I was recording last is like what I don't want to do next, basically. I always want like a new challenge. Yeah. So I was working on like a really heavy kind of screamer record the week before. And then this week I'm doing like more of a synthy post-hardcore kind of band. But then like next week I'm doing shoegaze and a grunge band. So it's kind of like, I really need that, I think. Like, I'm really looking forward to next week because I've done quite a bit of heavy. I've done like 2 weeks of heavy. I did like a melodic hardcore thing in Jan as well. So it's kind of like I'm ready for a little bit more kind of like soft, clean, jangly guitars and like a little bit more kind of like pop sensibility vocals, you know.
A smorgasbord of genres then, basically.
Yeah, there's lots of cool stuff coming on, but whatever I was doing last is like what I don't want to do next, basically.
So what are your plans for 2023 then? Who have you got coming in the studio? What kind of projects are you working on that you can talk about?
I've got, there's tons of stuff coming up. I've got stuff stretching all the way to like sort of August, September time. But to be honest, outside of work, like I'm having a baby in late March, April.
No, congratulations.
So that's the big change this year. Thank you very much. So yeah, I've actually taken a little bit of time off. So I'm taking a month away from the studio for the first time ever, really. And then I'm going to be doing a little bit less tracking actually than normal. So I'm just kind of focusing a little bit more on being at home and taking on the projects that like I really feel invested in. And then I'm going to be trying to do a little bit more mixing. So I've got like a mixing rig at home so I can potentially be there a little bit more up until, you know, the summertime. But yeah, I've got stuff coming up with, I've got Grey Wave is doing a couple of singles next week. A band called Mercury are also in next week. And I've got more stuff coming up with Queen Cults in March. And then I'm doing a record with Forlorn in July. And then some more work with Collectors in August, I think. And then I can't remember what else I've got, actually. There's a few bits floating around. Some stuff unconfirmed. Some stuff TBC.
Nice. Sounds like you're pretty busy then.
Yeah, it's going to be a mad one this year, definitely. Yeah. It's going to be crazy.
And what about the studio and yourself as a producer? You know, this time next year, what do you hope to have achieved?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. Just more of the same. More of the same. I think I really like where things are going, and I couldn't ask for much more, really, could I? Like, at the end of the day, I'm recording bands for a living. That's already kind of mental. Like, I would love to develop like the next Bring Me the Horizon and like have an absolute smash on my hands. But let's just see. I don't want to put that kind of pressure on, and I just feel really lucky that I get to do it. And if I could just keep going for many more years, and as long as things feel like they're still kind of like gaining traction, and every single year that I've done this has been better. Every single year. And the bands that I work with are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I feel the proudest when it's the bands that I've worked with from nothing. And then when I start to see bands like that, when they start to get, like 200,000 streams or 300,000 streams. But I knew them 5 years ago when they were getting less than 1,000 per song. It's like those experiences are amazing. So if I could like keep growing those relationships through this year and like see some of my bands like do really, really well and get on those, big festival slots and stuff, like that'd be awesome. But we'll see what happens, eh? We'll see.
See what the future holds.
Let's see, man.
Thanks very much for your time, Sam. I really do appreciate it. Like say, long time no speaks.
Yeah, man. It's been really nice to catch up. Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for coming on. Before I do let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening, have you got any final words, anything you want to say, anything you want to plug?
No, I think I eased that into the podcast in a very subtle way.
You did
throughout. Yeah, very subtle. No, great. Just if anyone's listening, just thanks so much for listening. And if you're looking for anyone, then please feel free to reach out and we'll have a chat. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sam. Take care of yourself.
Zach.
Speak soon.
Bye, mate. Bye.
And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast, then please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. If you want to support the podcast further, you can go and give it a follow on social media, pick up something from the merch store, or subscribe to the Patreon to get early access to episodes. All the links can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again, hopefully catch you on the next one, and remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.